Hi, my name is Peter Moe, and I'm from Tourism Ireland's Nordic office in Copenhagen. Today we will be talking about one of the most western points of the island of Ireland, the Aran Islands. We have the perfect people here today to enlighten us on this: Eugene and Joan from Doolin to Aran Ferries. Eugene Garahy is a native of Doolin, County Clare, and Joan has worked with Doolin to Aran ferries for many years. They are experts on the Aran Islands, and Eugene Garahy's family have sailed the waters between the islands for more than 70 years. Hi, Eugene and Joan. You're very welcome here today to the podcast. Would you mind telling our listeners why they should come and visit the islands and what your company has to offer?
So, yes, Peter, delighted with the opportunity to tell the world through Tourism Ireland what they will see when they arrive in Ireland and travel to the west of Ireland and to Doolin, and from Doolin out to the Aran Islands. Out there are three islands, and they are the most westerly outcrop of islands of Europe. And there are three islands: Inisheer, which is the easterly island,
Inisheer, yeah.
is the nearest one. It's only 15 minutes out from Doolin. The next island is Inishmaan, Meain. It's the middle island.
Inishmaan, yeah.
Yeah, that's another 10 minutes away. And then 10 minutes further out, you have Inishmore. More in English is big. Inishmore is the largest island. So Inisheer, Inishmaan, Inishmore.
Inishmore.
Yes.
Inisheer. God. Yeah. I'll
And
skip that part.
sometimes people remember it by saying Inishneer, the nearest one to the mainland.
All right.
Yeah, yeah.
And what do you do? So you ferry people to and from the islands, and
Yes, as we are located in Doolin, which is the heart of the Burren region of County Clare, a notable area for its flora and fauna and karst landscape of limestone. So we're just at the southern tip of the Burren in Doolin, and we're at the northern tip of the Cliffs of Moher, the famous Cliffs of Moher, that
Mm.
everybody that comes to Ireland is the most visited natural attraction in Ireland. So everybody that comes to Ireland are more or less compelled to view those Cliffs of Moher, which are 700 odd feet high, sheer cliffs into the Atlantic Ocean. So we're at the northern tip of the Cliffs of Moher, the southern tip of the Burren, and we're in the heart of traditional Irish music. It's the capital of traditional Irish music in Ireland. That's Doolin, where you can have a free concert 364 days a week, free every night in the bars.
Well, if
So
that's not a reason to go, I don't know what is.
so we are based at the Little Pier in Doolin, and every day from April to October, 7 days a week, we take tourists from Doolin, the mainland, to each of the Aran Islands, the island of their choice. And we also ferry them under the Cliffs of Moher on the way back
All
if
right.
that's their choice. So we do combination trips of the islands and the Cliffs of Moher.
Oh, but that's lovely. Then you get a bit more. Then it becomes an experience in itself, just sailing there, other than actually crossing a bit of the Atlantic.
Yes, and some people love the experience of being on a boat. More people are more interested in the destination of the island. And then, of course, while you're on the boat on the way back, if you want to do the combination trip, you sail under the majestic Cliffs of Moher.
I'm afraid of heights, so that sounds preferably preferable for me.
Well, Peter, the height from the boat to the water is quite steep as well. Or to the
But
sorry,
it's not the Cliffs of Moher height.
sorry, Peter. Peter, the height from the boat to the seabed is quite long as well.
Oh yes, but I can't see that. So that's lovely. Can you then what tell me about the islands? What makes them special?
I suppose I can jump in here, Peter. What makes them special is oh my God, what doesn't make them special? To be honest, they are absolutely stunningly beautiful for a start. Physically, they will be similar to the Burren landscape, so they are a limestone plateau, And basically that means
Okay.
they're absolutely full of rock. And one of the first impressions visitors who haven't been to any of the islands have is that there are so many walls. There are literally over 1,000 miles of stone walls built between the three islands. And that goes back to their ancient history. I mean, they were, I suppose, there's evidence of people living on the islands as far back as 2000 BC, and they would have come maybe from the Burren and settled out there, early farmers. But if you can imagine that they're just basically rock that they've landed on, they they literally had to make soil. So what they did was they would have used, primitive tools to break up this massive rock into walls, and then they built soil from sand and seaweed, layers of sand and seaweed,
All
to
right.
turn them
Okay.
into pasture. So it's absolutely stunning to see this, I suppose, history in action on the islands, because the walls are just everywhere, absolutely everywhere, and they're beautiful to look at, and the beautiful beaches and just the expanse of the islands. And of course, you can see in the distance, you can see the hills of Clare and the beautiful cliffs of Moher as well.
That sounds absolutely fascinating. I've only seen images of the Aran Islands, and I always thought that it was just plots of land. But it makes so much sense that it's the stone being removed for land to be created.
Yeah, yeah. And I have to admit, the potatoes that are grown on the Aran Islands are absolutely gorgeous. And I still remember Eugene's father bringing over a sack of potatoes for me from the islands, and he's saying, "You'll never taste anything like these in your life, Joan Hamilton." And he was dead right.
Fair enough. I mean, that's one thing to try then. I guess it's because they're grown in seaweed.
Yeah, that must be it. It's the unique soil makeup, I suppose, Eugene. Would you agree now?
Yes, and you're talking about the history. I had an aunt who passed away sadly at the age of 106 just a year ago, and she was born in 1915. And she traveled on a boat to the Aran Islands when she was 15 years of age, so in 1930. So she went out on a boat, a converted Galway hooker. The hooker is the name of the boat. So it was a converted Galway hooker. And she traveled to the island. And on her way back, she had two gifts. One was potatoes, and the other one was a pair of shoes called pampooties, and they were just bare leather. So they just protected the foot from the ground. I don't think they were that comfortable, but they were made from leather and laced together with leather. And they were called pampooties. And the history there is that the trade started between the islands. So they would bring out fish and potatoes to the mainland, and in return, they would go back with goods from the mainland and turf, peat for their fires.
Hmm.
So that's where that was the primitive stage of the trading between the Aran Islands and the mainland of Doolin.
Okay. Fair
And
enough.
it's interesting as well that the potato famine, never reached the islands. So they were self-sustaining, and obviously still to this day they could be. Now that's not to say in modern days that the islanders don't go online and do their grocery shopping from the stores and have them delivered by the boats. That is, obviously they've
It's
moved with the
fair.
times, but they can survive, and they have proven that they can survive by their own hand out on these little islands off the west coast of Europe.
And Joan mentions the famine there, a very unique thing where the population of Ireland reduced by, I think, 3 million during the famine. The
Hmm.
population of two of the Aran Islands increased because they were sustainable islands and could survive on their own.
All right. That's quite impressive.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So, how is life there on the Aran Islands? How many people live there?
So today, the islands are certainly, I suppose, if we can stretch that word sustainability, they are sustainable communities. And most of their income now is derived from, well, some of them have civil servant jobs, and they work either teachers on the island, or they work teachers on the mainland. They can travel in and out now. But the biggest industry on the island is based on tourists coming from around the world and traveling to the island. So you have tourism, you have farming. They still farm out there. They farm cattle out there and sheep, and a little bit of fishing. So the fishing that goes on there, you will find that when tourists visit the island, a large percentage of the fish that they may eat in the restaurants or in the bars is caught locally, which is a really, really nice touch when it comes to food and sustainability.
It really is. And I'm assuming then that you can also have those then famous potatoes. At least that's what I'm hoping for when I go there one day.
Absolutely.
So potatoes, if you were going to the islands and you mentioned potatoes, they might look at you just a little bit, strange, because they call them proti. That's the Irish. The other thing is proti, yeah. So what we haven't mentioned yet, which is very important, Peter, is the three islands speak the native language, the Irish language. So they all speak amongst themselves Os Gaeilge in Irish.
There are not a lot of communities that still do that, are there?
No, they're much more limited now. But I suppose again the islands of Galway, the islands of Donegal, and the communities in Kerry, and also Western Galway and Connemara would have been the strongholds of the Irish language, and it's beautiful to hear it spoken. It really is, and it's a live language. It's not something, Eugene and I are from the mainland. We would have grown up learning Irish in school, but speaking English at home. Whereas the schools in the islands, they learn everything through Irish. So it's part of their daily lives, and they're very, very proud people of their culture. It's something that I love to. I work in the marketing for the ferry company, and I love to meet the guides, the native guides on the islands, and introduce them to people from all around the world, and they cannot wait to tell you their story, to tell you their history. And there's little museums over there. There's a museum on Inisheer, for example, that has two tailor dummies of like a man's clothing and a woman's clothing. And it's not ancient clothing we're talking about. We're talking about maybe from the 70s, 60s and 70s. And, one of the ladies that I would work with, her name is Una. And she'd say, well, this is actually my father's clothes. And it's, as Eugene said, the pamputis, the little leather shoes. There was always a tailor on the island who would weave their own clothes. Like, they literally were self-sustaining. And the clothes that the men wore on the currachs, they were oil-based trousers to help prevent them from getting completely saturated. And of course, the famous Aaron
currachs, are they?
Sorry, currachs are boats.
Fair enough. A special boats from the islands, or is it a
yeah, I'll hand you back over to the boat person in the conversation.
So when you arrive on the island, you will note lots of currachs on the beach and around the pier area. And the currach is a wooden boat coated in canvas and tar. It's black.
Okay.
And those currachs were built on the island, and they were for fishing and transport. So they are still visible today. When you arrive on the island, you can go check them out, feel them, look under them, see how they were built. And they're an amazing structure, and they're still being used today.
Oh, really?
They have this bow at the front that goes these massive big waves that the men and women would use to row through, and they're shaped in a particular way to cope with the Atlantic.
But Joan, the bow of the boat is always at the front.
Oh, ha, ha. I told you were the boat person, Eugene. I just do the pictures.
For anyone who hasn't guessed, the front of the boat is called the bow.
There's actually photographs from years ago of cattle in currachs, And that's how because the big ships couldn't come into the piers in the islands. They were
All
too,
right.
so they would have to transfer the animals and their whatever stock they bought from the mainland onto these tiny boats and row them in.
That sounds horrifying, to be
It
honest.
does, doesn't it?
I wouldn't want to be on a small boat with cattle, any
Hmm.
form. You mentioned briefly that sweaters. What is there with
Yeah.
sweaters and?
So, well, one of the most famous, I suppose, icons of Ireland is the Aran sweater or the Aran jumper. We call them jumpers here in Ireland, but sweaters would be a more international word for it. So the Aran sweater it's basically it was uh, made by the women on the islands for the men going fishing. It was to keep them warm while they were out at sea, and it's a very bulky, heavy knit using very coarse wool. But it's
Okay.
it's it's stylish as well. It has a distinct pattern. There's a diamond stitch. There's the blackberry stitch. And they often said that you could recognize the family of the people by the sweater they wore because they were very distinctive.
Oh,
The other thing, Peter, is when the men dressed in their woolen suits and jumpers, they also wore, and their pamputi shoes, but they also wore these multicolored belts in wool. They were absolutely spectacular. There must have been 50 different colors in them in wool, and they were amazing, weren't they, Joan?
Yeah, yeah.
but why woolen belts?
Well, it's just, I suppose, leather would have been a more expensive material, so they'd use wool to keep the trousers up.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And they're called a kris, and they're just really colorful. The clothing is beautiful. That the women used to wear a huge big red skirt and a black shawl, but they only got the black shawl when they got married. So it was almost like it was a statement of status as well.
Okay.
So
And you can experience these different types of clothes still on the islands, or is it, as you said, you said you could see them in museums because they were quite
yeah,
recent?
there is small exhibition areas, particularly on on Inishmore and on Inisheer. But yeah, definitely you can have a look at them there.
Perfect.
You can also purchase those Aran sweaters on the islands.
Oh, nice. And they're good and warm.
Yes, and if you really want something quite unique, you can order one, especially made for yourself, hand knitted. But of course,
Oh,
that takes time, but it is a very special gift.
definitely. Sounds lovely. So, living out there on more or less the western edge, is there a connection to the Americas?
You mean is there a ferry that goes over and back every day?
Yeah.
No,
No.
there isn't, Peter, but there is a connection. Well, I suppose the first connection really was made during famine times, and after that, with the huge waves of immigration between Ireland and other countries. And in particular, there were huge numbers from the islands would have gone to North America, and in particular to Boston. Of course, there's a connection between the Aran Islands and Galway because they're actually in the county of Galway, despite the fact that they're closer to County Clare and Doolin. But Galway claimed them before we could get our hands on them, so they're still in Galway. So there's a connection between there and Connemara. And in Boston, there's a community that still speak the native language, Irish, and an awful lot of them are involved in heavy civil engineering and tunneling, etc. And I am told, as late as recently, when I was over there, I met people from Boston, down further south, southern states, but I met people from Boston, and there are communities over there that speak the Irish language to themselves every day.
That's amazing. Because, I mean, it has been a couple of 100 years since the famine, has it not?
It has been 1840. Yeah, absolutely. Almost a couple of 100 years now. Yeah. But I'm sure the same people that went over there are probably passed away now at this stage, and they're
Definitely.
but yeah, it's unique, isn't it?
It's very unique. It's very special. It's very seldom that languages tend to survive, well, once you get into a larger group.
Yeah.
We find a lot of our visitors from America are coming back to reconnect with their family history,
Heritage.
their
All right.
heritage. And they're really eager to see if there's any connection there. Now, there isn't always a direct connection to the Aran Islands, but obviously the culture would be very, very similar in other parts of Ireland. It's just a lot more visible on the island still because it's preserved. So you can actually walk into the small cottages and see the flagstone floors and the big open hearth where the fire is. And it's very, oh, what would you call it? Kind of touchy feely. You can actually imagine your ancestors living like this and then moving from there to America and all that they went through in America to, create a life for themselves and their young families, and then the generations that moved on. It's quite emotional for a lot of them to see where their families would have come from.
I can imagine so. I mean, it sounds like there is a very small step, as you could say, between the past and the present on the Aran
Absolutely.
Islands.
Yeah. Because I suppose, again, it's an island, so, modern day living is not as obvious, but it is there. As I said, they'll still order their online shopping, and they've actually got a better Wi-Fi system than Doolin has. But, yeah, they're still, as I say, very, very proud of their heritage. They still speak in Irish, and obviously
Yeah.
they can go back generations on the islands to their forefathers who would have lived in the islands. Because the
Fair.
same families tend to live there year on year on year.
Now, should you want to go visit one of these families that have lived there year and year and year, I would imagine you have to go through Doolin. So how do you go to Doolin? Or how do you arrive at Doolin?
So, access to Doolin, you can fly to Shannon Airport, which is about an hour from Doolin. And if you fly into Dublin, it's 2.5 hours by road. 3 hours if you don't know the road. But and then that access is by if you fly into Dublin from around Europe, or if you fly into Dublin from around Europe or from the USA. And obviously, from Europe, you can travel by ferry from the UK, from France, from Spain, and from Holland.
Fair enough, but not directly to to Doolin though. But yes,
No, not directly to Doolin,
Mm.
Peter. No,
No,
no.
our pier isn't that big yet, Peter.
fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose when people say they want to come to Ireland and they want to see the various famous sites, they do think they look at Ireland on a map and say, "Oh, it's a tiny little island. I can do so much so quickly." We would always encourage people to take a little bit longer in an area and experience it rather than trying to, drive
Rush through.
from, say, Kerry to the Cliffs of Moher and Doolin and on to Galway in one day. All you will remember is roads, because it is beautiful, but it is the west coast of Ireland on the Wild Atlantic Way, and the roads aren't highways or motorways. They're little windy coastal routes that,
Mm.
don't encourage speeding on, etc. So we would always say, take at least a day or two in Doolin, base yourself in the Burren, and that way you'll get to go to the islands for a day, see the cliffs, see the beautiful Burren itself. You can take gorgeous walks through the limestone, enjoy the Irish music at night, and you'll feel much more absorbed in the culture than just ticking a box and say, I saw the cliffs at 12 o'clock and I'm in Galway for my dinner at 3. And really, you're not going to experience uh, the
Anything
proper,
actually,
yeah,
yeah.
no, 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 no.
But that is interesting. What would you then recommend that people experience when they visit the islands? What's the must sees? What's
Yeah, like, again, it's how long is a piece of string? Because we could talk all day about the islands. Unfortunately, your listeners would get bored. But if you have a small family, for example, the children will probably be absolutely delighted with Inisheer's lighthouse. There's an amazing shipwreck. It's shipwrecked
really
there. It was a cargo boat that shipwrecked there in 1960. The islanders rescued every sailor on board, but the ship itself was on a second storm was pushed up beyond high tide, so it's just literally sitting there rusting away.
so it's on
Uh,
land?
it's on land. It's up on
Oh,
rocks. Yeah, yeah. And so it's actually quite a famous shipwreck in Ireland called the Plassey. And it's famous because it was also in I'm not sure how many international listeners will remember Father Ted. It was an Irish TV show based on a fictional island called Craggy Island, which was actually in Inisheer. And the opening credits showed the Plassey shipwreck. So a lot of people say, "Oh my God, that's from Father Ted," So yeah, there you go, bit of trivia for you.
So if you've seen Father Ted, then it's definitely a must to go.
Absolutely, 100%. But yeah, I mean, what is there to do? You can hire bicycles, you can walk them. Fabulous, fabulous walking. And I know you Nordic people love to walk and cycle. And so you can hire bikes over there. There's thousands of bikes to be hired over on the islands. And the roads are small and tarred, so they're ideal for biking because there's very, very few cars.
All right.
Very few cars. You cannot bring a car on the passenger ferries. They're not car ferries. They're just foot passengers only. And you can also get a pony and trap with a native guide who will bring you around and point out the various points of interest, like the shipwrecks or we've got Stone Age forts there. There are actually
Really?
seven Stone Age forts between the three islands. The most famous one is called Dún Aengus, and it's on Inishmore. It is because of the limestone, these forts are remarkably intact. So you can actually see a lot of the structures. Some of them are almost completely still circular, for example. But the Dún Aengus was built on the edge of a 300-foot cliff, and so it's U-shaped, like with the outer top of the U towards the sea. So they were kind of, you would love to go back in time and saying, what in the name of God were they protecting themselves from building a fort on a 300-foot cliff? They must have been awful savage people, is all I can say. But this Dún Aengus fort anyway is one of the heritage points on Inishmore and a very famous icon for people to visit.
I have to say, 300 feet. That's about 90 meters. That's a fairly steep drop.
100%. Yeah, yeah. And the forts were the homes of the chieftains. So in medieval times, the word Dún, which is like there's Dún Aengus, there's Dún Dúchar, Dún means fort. So the fort of a king or a chieftain. And they controlled the western sea passages. So any of the merchant fleets that were passing by Galway Bay had to pass by the Aran Islands on their way to Galway.
Right.
And these guys were actually being paid by the merchants in Galway to protect the seas. But history apparently says that they were doing a bit of the pirating themselves. So they were kind of double jobbing and getting well paid for it. But yeah, so there was a lot of activity on that western seaboard back in the day.
But that still sounds amazing. I've never seen. Well, at least I don't believe I've ever seen a Stone Age fort. I didn't even know that there was such a thing.
There you go. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Then when you move on a little, you have actually around the 12th century, there was a huge amount of pilgrim activity in Ireland, and the Aran Islands were a very popular pilgrimage. Probably because, can you imagine how hard it would have been to access these islands at the time? So you were doing an awful lot of penance to get there in the first place, But these ancient, saints and scholars built these tiny little churches. They had their own followings. They were basically monks or hermits, and people would come to them then on pilgrimages. And one of them, Temple Vannon, is supposed to be the smallest church in Ireland. It's a tiny little stone building on the eastern side of Inishmore, and it's a little, you can have a stop at it on your tour of the island. You can go off on your bike to find it, or be brought there by the pony and traps. So there's kind of the Stone Age history, there's the religious history, and then there's the actual physical beauty of the island. With the burren, you've got the beautiful flowers. The landscape is ablaze with these flowers, usually around May. And then, of course, there's the beautiful beaches. So if you ask me what's my favorite part of the islands, would be the beaches. They are stunning, like the Caribbean.
So that's your favorite part of the islands then. Let me hear you then, Eugene. What's your favorite place on the Aran Islands then?
My favorite place on the Aran Islands, I am ashamed to say, is the inside of any one of the 3 pubs. With a nice pint of Guinness in my hand, listening to a traditional song from a native of the Aran Islands. Now, I'm sorry it's not more romantic than that, Peter, but that's it in a nutshell.
But that does sound quite romantic.
So I
have an interesting question here. So you mentioned 3 pubs. Is there? I hope there's one on each island then.
Well, no, not alone is there one on each island, but there's 3 on the smallest island.
Oh, right. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. And there's one on the middle island in Ishman, and there is 3 or 4 or 5 on Inishmore. So if you're in there, maybe you'd like to read a little book or the daily paper. Sorry, we're into phones now, aren't we? Sorry. And if you have a good pint of Guinness in front of you, and maybe with the promise of a fresh fish chowder on the way, and a song or a sing-song starting in the corner, and maybe in the autumn with a turf fire burning in the corner. Now, you try and drag me out of that, Peter. You'll have some job.
I'm sorry, Eugene. I'm going to have to call you a liar here because you said that wasn't romantic. That is definitely romantic.
Well, that's what you will find in the most western outcrop of Europe. And what a beautiful place. I think anybody that's listening to this podcast my simple advice to them would be, please, do yourself a favor. Do not leave the surface of this earth without visiting the Aran Islands from Doolin, County Clare.
Now, that is an absolutely fantastic thing to say. I think we're close to rounding it off here. I'd just like to ask 2 more questions. Is there an Irish word or phrase that we should know when we come and visit the islands? I say we because I'm definitely going at some point.
Well, I am not a native Irish speaker. I am so sad and embarrassed and ashamed to say. But I have a few words that are very important when you get onto the island. And if you haven't practiced, it's easy. And it is Cewiltu.
Cewiltu.
And I would say, Tá mé go maith. I am very good. Agus tú féin. And how are you? And they might say, Tá anawa. I am very, very good.
Fair enough.
I'll give you a simpler one, Peter. For when you're sitting in that little romantic pub with your pint of Guinness and the turf fire in the background, and you see the 2 old lads at the counter speaking Oscailga, and you want to kind of, show that you're trying to be part of their world, you just go up with your pint and you say, Sláinte.
Sláinte. Well, I mean, it's going to be hard to go to Ireland without learning that one. But I think that's absolutely fantastic.
And if you want to be really welcomed, Peter, buy them 2 pints.
Yeah.
Now that is a good tip for anyone traveling in. Now to round it off here, I think, the obvious question is, how can our listeners get in contact with you to find out more about what you offer and what you do when they are definitely going to the Aran Islands?
Yeah, well, we are active on our social media, so we would welcome anybody to look us up on Facebook or Instagram on Doolin to Aran, and the 2 is the number 2, so it's Doolin to Aran. You can obviously go online and go to our website. We try and update our blog regularly as well with information. There is actually a lovely blog about Eugene's Aunt Nellie and her visit to the Aran Islands in the 1930s, for example, and you can book online there. So it's doolin2aranferries.com.
That is absolutely perfect. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure and very informative. And now I just simply can't wait to go to the Aran Islands and to stop in Doolin first.
So. Very good. And stay a couple of nights. Don't just come and go.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Joan. Talk to you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.